everybody, and welcome to our podcast today. I have some amazing guests joining me. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a second, but first of all, I just wanted to briefly talk about who we are and why we're here today. So I have Gary Jones here from Totum, who approached me with an idea to do this podcast. I'll let Gary introduce himself in a second. I have Estelle Read here from Bee. Estelle has been working, I know, in this field for many years in the topic of obviously mental health and way beyond that as well, you know, in terms of her coaching skills. And she's got more qualifications than I've had hot dinners. But she is a fabulous support, I know, to many leaders out there at the moment. And then I'm really proud and pleased to be joined by Louise Ingram as well, who is the partner at the top of our business, really driving forwards our approach to mental health and well-being in the workplace. So between us, we've got a whole host of experience. But just before we get started, there are just two things I wanted to share as a point of context. The first thing is that by coincidence, there were some statistics shared last week, I think from the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, saying that mental health reasons are now the single biggest reason for long-term workplace sickness. People who are off with long-term sickness in the workplace now outnumber those who are also off, but with more physically based illnesses or injuries. So that shows you that despite the fact that on the surface we are moving beyond the pandemic and other things, we know there is a big problem still with people really suffering with mental health. And what we believe, and this is why Gary's here today, is incredibly important we talk about this and we keep talking about it. We also know that it's very prevalent with young people. So I think if we as leaders are opening that safe space up, we are really helping and enabling other people to talk about it. Which brings me to Gary. So Gary and I have known each other for about 20 years when he actually, with his business partner, Tim Skipper, placed me into my previous job in another law firm. And I think you were just starting the business up at that point, Gary, weren't you? It was fairly early doors.
You're our first candidate. What a start.
I know, what happened? So you're responsible for my 20-year career in the legal service. I can only say thank you, maybe. So anyway, Gary approached me again a few months ago, and I have so much admiration for Gary. You're out there on LinkedIn. I love your style of presentation, your humor. I love the business that you and Tim have built. I've got to know some of your team over the years as you've done work for us as well. It's a fabulous business that I feel very honoured to have played a tiny part in being a candidate at the beginning. And you're a B Corp as well, I believe, aren't you? So there's some fabulous stuff going on there. But Gary approached me with a very different story and said that he wanted to talk about mental health. And I was so much in awe of this that we then got together with Estelle and said, right, how can we do this? How can we help Gary share his story, but also in a way that hopefully will inspire others to do the same thing, but puts a bit of support around the whole thing as well. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to Estelle, who will introduce, I'm sure, herself in a bit more detail, and then introduce Gary and his story. And we'll talk through some of that. And then at the end, myself and Louise will rejoin the conversation as well to talk about a broader context of how we can support people in what continues to be really challenging times. I should say before we start, Gary's story could have relevance for people on the call. Gary's going to talk about Hillsborough and what happened there. And we will put some support and some other things out with this as well to help people if you are triggered at all. But we did want to explain that at the top of this session, just in case anybody chooses that they don't want to listen to this part of it for very understandable reasons. Estelle, over to you.
Great, thank you. What a wonderful introduction. I don't think there's a lot else I can say other than the reason I have a long list of qualifications is I totally suffered with imposter syndrome, workaholism and stress, and that's how I got into the field of work that I'm in. So enough about me, over to you, Gary. We're really intrigued by your story. What was it that, in fact, can you begin by sharing with us what was it that made you decide that you want to share this with people?
Yeah, thank you, Estelle. Appreciate being invited. It took me a long time, decades, to talk about this subject, and I never spoke about it with anybody. I never dealt with it. I didn't know how to deal with any of this, and I thought I was fine, if I'm honest. And then something happened a couple of years ago which triggered it all back and caught me by surprise. And I finally done something about it, spoken to people, got help. So going back to what Sarah said before, primarily, I can't be the only person who hasn't spoken about, dealt with something. And if me sharing this helps other people, think about perhaps they should get some help or talk about it, then I've done a good thing. I suppose, and finally, now I have spoken about it, I don't want to put myself back in the box I put myself in. I'd rather keep talking about it because it's helped me, and I think it'll continue to help me. So part of it's a selfish thing as well, I guess.
No, that's great. And I was just saying earlier, I was with a dear friend at the weekend, and her partner was involved in the same disaster and used pretty much the same strategy. Don't talk about it, put it in a box. So I think you've been incredibly brave sharing that with us. How, we're going to go with you today, and we'll go at your pace. What aspects of what happened at Hillsborough do you want to share with us, if anything?
I think I'm happy to talk about it. I felt absolutely fine until about 10 minutes ago, but I think I'm absolutely fine. It was a long time ago.
Yes.
5 years ago, and I was 20 years old.
Yes.
I was on my Easter holidays from university, and I travelled with a school friend, on a supporters coach. And it, for people who don't know, and why should a lot of people know, it was an FA Cup semi-final, and it took place in Sheffield. What happened on that day? Everything was going normally. We'd go to lots of matches, and I was lucky enough to be sitting in the seats above the pen where everybody lost their lives.
Yes.
But I remember a massive surge of supporters into that area, and the difficulty John, my friend, and I had actually trying to push against almost like a strong tidal wave of water to get ourselves up the staircase to get to our seats. So we were being pushed into this pen of people that we didn't want to go into.
Yeah.
But they were the circumstances that have now been well publicised as to why various gates were opened or not opened. And so I remember at the time that was quite funny. If we'd gone into the pen and were standing, so what? Standing, sitting, it was a football match, for God's sake. Looking back, we then ended up being seated above and looking down over everything which then transpired.
Yeah.
What transpired is people started to lose their lives and then carried on losing their lives. And we stood there watching it all happen in front of us. If I'm honest, at the time, everybody thought a few people had been badly injured. And it was only, later on when I was back on the coach that I realised, someone had lost their life and someone else had lost their life. And then the number ticked up and ticked up and ticked up.
Yeah.
What I vividly remember, there was no mobile phones on those days. And that's something that, I find it hard to comprehend what it would be like these days.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to call my mum and dad, but you couldn't. The network lines were down between Sheffield and Liverpool. So I think it was 5 hours from when that tragedy happened or started to me getting home off a coach in Liverpool about 8 o'clock and me going to a pub. Those little phones that you got at the end of pub bars where you used to put 50p and 20p and you got 1 millisecond. I won't say what I said. I may do in a minute because that's what I think will trigger me. But that 5 hours went by where my family thought I died.
Yeah.
You would do, wouldn't you? Because I hadn't. Yeah. And I remember being on a coach going home and people looking through the window, driving past you, the rubbernecking you get now with accidents, people staring at us in the coach because we've been on the news, we were on the radio, and some of the seats on the coach were empty. I still don't know what happened to those people. It was chaos. But I was lucky that day. And I always thought I was lucky. I didn't buy into the I'm a survivor or none of that.
Yeah.
I was lucky. And I then never dealt with anything which happened on that day. Because at that point, I'm not even sure I knew what dealing with it was.
Mm-hmm. But also mental health wasn't spoken about like it is today.
No.
And yeah, I mean, it's interesting you use the word lucky. That in itself is a very positive word to use, isn't it? And interesting as well that you had some kind of, I don't know whether I've got this wrong, Gary, but almost that you had some kind of an instinct as to, because my friend had the same thing. He was actually in the tunnel, and he just got an instinct, and they went against the tide of people.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, thank you for being so brave to tell us that. And I know the bit which you said is triggering, and you know, you can share with us whatever feels comfortable, and whether we get to it or not, I'll leave that. I'll be guided by you. What happened afterwards? So, you know, what support was in place? What impact did it have on your life?
Yeah, so no support was in place that I was aware of. You know, to be honest, the focus of people was, you know, supporting the people and families who'd lost someone, and quite rightly. I mean, I was fascinated by. I couldn't stop reading about it and looking at pictures and trying. I don't know what I was doing, but I was reliving it for a few days. But I went back to university on the Monday after the Saturday afternoon, and I wanted to be back with my mates.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the main areas of guilt that I have, and I have a few, is that I wasn't able. I didn't talk to my dad or my sister about it. I didn't want to talk about it or the day.
Yeah.
It went on for 30 years, 35 years. But I remember that phone call I made from that pub bar, and my mum's voice, and the silence, and what home was like when I got back to it.
Yeah.
And I wish I'd spoken to them about it, but I didn't. I went back to get on with my life because I wanted to. And I did that. And I've no idea, the person I am now, how that affected me that day. It certainly linked me very closely to the city. You know, I became, kind of, entwined with a football club. Felt it was my duty to go to every match, almost like I'd been not given a second chance. That's over melodramatic, but I felt that people had lost their lives, so I should therefore do everything I could to support the club, the city, etc., etc. But effectively, I thought I was fine, and I thought I was lucky.
Yeah.
I just got on with it.
Yeah.
And felt that was the right thing to do. Looking back now, with amazing amount of hindsight, I wish I'd done things a bit differently.
Well, with every behaviour, there is always a positive purpose and intention behind it. So, number one, you were only 20, weren't you? You did what you felt was right at the time. And you know what else was clever about what you did? Reliving it for days, going through the paper, that's a form of processing. So actually, one of the ways in which you can heal from trauma is if you are in a safe place to process that, you reduce the impact of the trauma. So that was actually a really clever, instinctive thing to do. What if you were to, so going back to, in hindsight, it is a beautiful thing, isn't it? But there will have been a positive purpose and intention behind what you did. And what would you say that was?
The positive intention behind, and I was, my friends were all calling me up. They're calling my landline up at home. No mobile phones. I still can't believe it, but and they were worried. I wanted to see them. I wanted to, be with them. I wanted to get on with everything. I wanted things to be normal.
Yes.
And my mum and dad were glad I was back home, and that's all they wanted, for me to be safe. And it was safe, and I wanted them to see me safe and getting on with my life because I was fine.
Yeah.
So that was it. It's
So
only
that was your positive intention. So there was a
that was my
positive
positive
intent.
intention. I hadn't realised that until this call, but perhaps that was. I thought it was selfish, but perhaps there's another way of looking at it.
Yeah. I can tell you are such an empathetic, caring person, and you were thinking about your parents in that moment. And even the fact, I tell you what else is incredible, Gary, is the fact that you kept going back to matches and you took it on. Because that is a really brave thing to do, again, because if you suffer with PTSD, to go back and face your fear. But again, you could argue that that's, when you look at some therapies, you get exposure to the thing that you're afraid of. So the fact that you kept going will have also helped you to process what had gone on. So you inadvertently helped yourself.
Okay, interesting.
So now let's shift to tell us what happened in Paris.
Okay, so a couple of years ago, I went to the Champions League final in Paris with my son. My son was then 23. Just getting my dates right now. So then I talk about young child, but I took my son, and it was going to be a great weekend, and it was for a couple of days. Now, a lot of this is now well publicised, and a lot of it was misreported, but it's now been put in the right frame. There was major issues with the policing and management of that event, and there was crushing, potential crushing on the way to the ground. It was in an underpass, and I remember going into the underpass, and people going to the ground, and then you couldn't get out the underpass because the police vans were blocking off into a V formation, basically letting kind of one person through at a time. So people were piling on one side of the road into an underpass, and then were then stuck in it, and people couldn't exit it. Now, I don't know. For most people, they was, oh my God, bloody football, kind of, this is funny, isn't it? Come on, get on with it. And I could feel my tension rising and rising, because I could see people on the side of the road entering, and they weren't going, and it was getting tighter and tighter. I don't think my son kind of thought it was as bad as I thought of it. I was envisaging what could happen if this didn't start to move in a little bit of time, and that's where it started for me. Kind of the memories. We got to the ground. We were not involved, and others were badly involved in a lot of further pressing and tear gas firing and issues getting through gates. We were pretty lucky. The gate we were at, we got into the ground, but I was aware of issues happening left and right, and we were just delighted to be in the ground. It was like a sanctuary. You think, my God, how hard is it to get to a football match? But there was two triggers then, and I was on edge. My son and I were sitting in separate seats, separate parts of the ground. I was on edge about that as well. And when we left the ground, it had gone dark. Pretty sure it was dark. Yes, it was dark. And I mean, there were gangs there, and people were trying to hurt fans as they left the ground. That is common knowledge now. And I haven't been in a war zone, and I don't want to belittle war zones, but that's the only expression I can think. People were rushing to get away towards the tube station, and I was petrified. I was literally frightened, and I was frightened. I'm pretty sure I was frightened because my son was with me. He was with me, but he was not next to me, because people were running different directions. There's people being tripped up. There was people hitting people. I don't know who's hitting who. It was horrendous, and it was the final straw for me. And I just wanted to get into a tube station. Even on the tube station, there were issues. Onto a train into central Paris. And the whole thing was horrendous. And we got out of Paris the next day, and at that point I'd had enough of football and I was glad my son was home safe. But it was from that day onwards, for about 6 to 9 months, that I gradually started spiraling down and down and down. and converted all of what I've just told you into I put my son's life in danger by, and I should be the only person, not the only person. There's not many people in the world who know the problems and issues that can happen at a big sporting event. And I put him back exactly in that situation, and look what nearly happened. That's what I believed increasingly for many months.
Yeah. And what did you, in order to overcome that belief, what's the alternative viewpoint or perspective on that?
Well, in the end, I got some help, and I relived that day and Hillsborough, in 15 half an hour steps. I keep forgetting the name of the technique. You know it. It's where you follow someone's finger and
Yes.
the eye. But I relived it for the first time both days in minute detail, step by step. And I, of course, realised that it wasn't my fault. I went to a football match with my son, which was a massive thing for him and for me.
Yeah.
And that should just be a normal thing that people do. And then bad things happened. And I connected the dots in the wrong way and come to, quite ridiculous conclusions.
Because you're a caring soul and a good dad.
But that's what I've done. But,
you were saying earlier that you started spiraling. So what were the clues, the signs? I'm thinking about people that are listening so that you could learn from your experience. What were the clues that you were spiraling?
Well, so, some of these are work and some of these are home things. And to be honest, as Sarah said at the start, those two things become entwined ever more these days, don't they? I started getting frightened of everything.
Yeah.
So, the bigger the meeting or event or something I had to be at, the more it would worry me. If it was a one-to-one Teams thing, if it was a one-to-one meeting, if it was a 3 or 4 people, I was kind of fine.
Mm-hmm.
Any more than that, I would start to worry that things could go wrong. If I went anywhere, something would go wrong. The bigger the event, the bigger the situation. So I think I covered this up to most people because I was trying to get on with my life and not be ridiculous. But I started avoiding things and going to things that, avoid things, that's unfair. I only went to things where I had to be at things. I didn't go to things that I could be at or quite like to be at. I'd withdraw from them. So I withdrew. And I avoided lots of things. Everything was frightening me. Everything was spooking me.
And what are your signs that you're frightened? So physiological.
Rising. There's an initial fear in my kind of chest and stomach when something's suggested in the first place. I can't go to that. I can't do that. I mean, that will just be. And if it ends up being something that I want to be at or I have to be at, then it will build up in my chest and my kind of general breathing in the days leading up to it. And I'll have to work hard to convince myself, no, it's fine. It'll be fine. What are you worried about? Because I know I'm good in meetings and I can cope with anything in the moment, and I always prepare well. So it's irrational fear in the build-up, and looking for reasons why I won't go or I can't be there.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you talk to yourself because that's that's a really good thing to do, rather than having an inner critic or someone, fear in that ear, to have a calming, I refer to it as an inner captain, somebody that steers the ship in a different direction. What other coping mechanisms did you use to manage this fear, or have you used?
Well, the talking to myself thing, I did break down everything, week to week and day to day. I did kind of break down, what have I got to achieve today? I keep reminding myself I've finished the morning. They were all fine as I thought they would be. This afternoon will be fine. So I started breaking it down day to day and kind of making sure I got through that day. And then I turned that into a week and gradually built those blocks up.
Yeah.
And even in a meeting, I have been known to, on Teams and stuff, I'm not doing it now, you'd be pleased to know, but, kind of just, right, if it's 60 minutes long, I'll write a note and I'll write a 60. And I will basically be going, right, 10 minutes have gone. And I'm doing all right here. This is fine. What's wrong with, talk to myself. Not out loud this time, but so I broke everything down to try and convince myself or remind myself that all these things are things I shouldn't be worrying about and get through as many as I can. And for a few months, it worked, but I wasn't sleeping well, and I was starting to get flashbacks and memories of Hillsborough that I'd never had for 30 odd years. Never had them.
Yeah.
That was making me tireder, and the tireder I got, the harder it was for me to succeed in all these coping mechanisms that usually work for me.
Yeah. And so when you say you had the flashbacks, was that so sometimes with PTSD, people can get nightmares and they can get flashbacks during nightmares, or was it actually when you were awake? How did it work for you?
It was when I was awake. So in the night, it was when I woke up, and before I fell back asleep again, something had cropped into my head. It was either, it might start with, my God, what have I got in the morning, to, why am I thinking about it? Oh my God. And then I'd go on to Hillsborough, then I'd wake up and be tired. During the day, it was when, your mind switches off a minute and you sort of stare into space and you suddenly think of something and the breathing starts to be affected. And then I'm trying to refocus on what I'm meant to be doing. It's all that sort of stuff.
And, so in the therapeutic community, we talk about something being sealed but not healed.
Yep.
And then we get unconscious leakage. So sometimes it could be in dreams, it could be, I know for some people, it's when they've had alcohol, you'll get unconscious leakage, memories will come forward. So that's a good thing for people to watch out for again, isn't it? So if it's disrupting your everyday functioning, so sleep and then feeling tired, that's what would you say so if anyone is listening who suspects they have PTSD, which stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, by the way, what would your advice be to anyone that's listening? What's been the most useful thing?
Well, eventually talking about it properly was the thing that helped me. But that started with just being honest that I wasn't coping and needed to talk to somebody. I am a big believer, always have been, of asking people if they're okay. And I'm also fully support, when people just say, yeah, I'm fine, just give me is that proper fine? Or is that a real okay? Or, I'll try again, because, you did. But I wasn't ready, to be honest, when people asked me if I was okay for a long time. So I went, yeah, I'm fine. I know I'm not, but that's how I wasn't ready. But when I was ready, my wife, colleague at work, people who had asked and who did care, when I was ready, I knew I could turn to them and I could go, you asked me. No, I'm not actually. And then that led me to, GP, kind of third party PTSD diagnosis, counselling, but it all started with the admission that I wasn't okay, and the recognition that my own method of dealing with it were not working and were not going to work. I had to arrest it at some point. So it was like reaching out for a life belt that someone had thrown a few months ago, going, where's that life raft, and I have it. It was that, basic stuff, I imagine, but, the stuff I read all the time, but I wasn't listening to it.
But again, it takes real bravery to, so, when we go through any change cycle, first step is always denial. So whenever we experience anything like that, and as long as we're stuck in denial, we're not dealing with something. And then we can get to anger, blaming, pointing the finger. And then we get to that acceptance point. Oh, actually, I'm ready. I'm looking for help. And then we get to the internalization and growth. So, yeah, I just think it takes real bravery to do that. Thank you so much for sharing your story. That was amazing.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary. Wow, so powerful and such a privilege having the opportunity to listen to that. And just a couple of things that have absolutely jumped out. The first thing is, I know when you phoned me, whenever it was towards the end of last year, you said you just wanted to help people. You've actually helped me already, just by really tuning in and listening to you today has really, really helped me on a number of different things, actually. And the words that absolutely stood out to me was, I thought I was fine. I think so many of us just carry on, don't we? We're quite stoic creatures. We kind of go, no, I'm fine, get on with it, move on. First world problems, all of that, we, on the whole, aren't we such immensely lucky and privileged people? But we're all dealing with things as well. And if nothing else, remembering that person who may be annoying you because they're driving the car too slow, or they push past you in the train station, or they've got their bag on the seat on the tube, or whatever it may be, these are all human beings as well. And I think the more we remember, we don't know what it is somebody else is dealing with. I think what a kind of better place the world would be if we had the empathy that you've clearly got, Gary, and that you've shared. And your story today just brings me back to the importance of talking about it, which is what you've done today. But to Estelle's point, it was your way into dealing with all of this. And for some mental health issues, talking about it probably will be enough. But for the deeper stuff, the PTSD, the other conditions that are out there, talking is the first step into getting help. And once you've done that, the rest follows. So thank you. And I know how much you want to encourage other people to reach out to talk, and you will have absolutely done that. I know you will. We will add some resources to this when we put this out there to help people as to where and how to reach out.
Thank you.
If I can bring Lou into the conversation as well. So obviously Gary's given us an example here of something that happened many years ago that has not necessarily been fully dealt with, if it ever can be fully dealt with, but has been triggered and re-engaging again. One of the things that's been worrying me is we've been through some collective trauma to different levels in different ways with the last few years. It's been pretty tough for people out there. Obviously the pandemic was a collective shock we went through. And I think to a certain extent, people are just getting on with it again. We're doing that. I thought I was fine. We are being fine, aren't we? And Lou, I think it's worth you sharing with us why you have absolutely taken on this mantle of being a champion for mental health and wellbeing, what you're doing within our business, but why you've taken it on, because I think there is a bit of a silent epidemic out there, with perhaps built on the scars of the pandemic, but also the cost of living crisis and various other things. But tell us why you've taken this on to help people and help get them talking.
I think and just give a bit of background. So I trained as a mental health first aider about 5 or 6 years ago, so not actually that long before the pandemic. And it became, in those first months and years that I was trained, it was very much we were 5 days a week in the office. We could see people. You can really see when someone was struggling, or you just thought, oh, I'll just pop and say hello to that person. That one-to-one daily interaction was really important to actually what we as mental health first aiders were doing. Then the pandemic came, and we all went home. We all locked ourselves away, and that brought about different challenges. And one of those was literally not seeing people. And although there were a lot of video calls, it's very easy not to have your camera on, or not to attend, or to make some sort of excuses. And we saw a lot of that. And so it became quite important to find communication links, to find a way to talk to people, and to allow people to speak, and for us to be there to listen. And I think that just really, for me, I thought that was, the pandemic was was terrible. Everybody had a different experience. People had some very difficult experiences, but it also just brought about a different way of living, a different way of appreciating those around us, and also a very different working life. And I think trying to bring all of that together, I just wanted everybody to be treated, not only in the workplace, but, to be treated the way that you would expect to be treated, and to really just have a way to find a way to put your arms around people, really, and make sure that people are getting the support that they need for whatever purpose that is. And so I think, for me, so the mental health first aider was the first step for me in becoming trained in a way to give some support, although we are there as listeners primarily. We're not medically trained. We are there as the first point of contact. But I also then took on the leadership of the wellbeing inclusion group within our business, which is really there in, if you like, a slightly softer way, but to provide ways that we can help those around us and really have well-being as the lens within which decision making is considered, and that we, in fact, we talked about, I've heard being human. For me, it astounds me that isn't the first thing in somebody's mind when they get up in the day. I want to be human. I want to treat others like humans. And actually, if we can just have that sort of approach, I think that can go a long way to helping people who are struggling with their mental health or their well-being, and help them be the best they can be, which within a business context can also only be good, because you want people firing on all cylinders.
Absolutely. And Lou, just to put this into context for everybody who doesn't know you, you're not a HR professional. You're basically a property lawyer, a senior property lawyer, and you're co-head of our Leicester office. So this is something you're doing alongside a leadership career, a technical career. It's something that you think is integrated rather than a separate thing.
I think people will have heard the statistic that for every £1 you put into mental health and wellbeing, you get £5 back as a business. So there will be a lot of people who don't appreciate, because they've never experienced poor well-being or poor mental health. But actually, if somebody is just looking at this from a business perspective, it makes business sense as well, because actually your people are your business, and so you need them to be the best they can be.
Thanks, Lou. Estelle, you obviously have a broad client base working with businesses and individuals. Do you feel this sort of silent epidemic, or do you think, is there a lot of it out there? Are people talking about it? What are you seeing?
My lens is quite kind of, I guess, skewed, because people come to me when they're on the edge. So they're burnt out, they're stressed out. And another interesting statistic, so almost half UK workers are running on empty through burnout, which is costing 28 billion. That was back in September 2023, that statistic. So this stiff upper lip, let's just carry on. When I see them, they're at the very edge. So I am almost like the last chance saloon. Often they've gone off with work, but the people I work with typically are really, really, they're already dead successful. So this is the imposter syndrome connection. They don't see how brilliant, how wonderful they are. They're often good eggs. They are doing more than they should be. There's an absence of, because there's this interesting mix between what pressure the business puts on an individual, but also the human comes to work as well with all their triggers and all of their experiences, and the two have to come together and work together. So, in other words, making sure that the pressure is reasonable from the business, but the individual also comes with all of their triggers and all of the things that makes them overwork and get stressed out and burnt out. And, it was interesting talking to Gary that, once you can see yourself or your experience in a different light, then, and, obviously I cheat with change. I use a technology called havening, and that just creates an automatic behavior change. It stops people being triggered within a particular context. But yeah, it's often people that have been strong too long.
Absolutely. And that what you were talking about earlier really resonated with me about it being sealed away. That's yes. Not going to be healthy in the long term for anybody, is it?
No.
Gary, what are you seeing professionally? Obviously, you work with an awful lot of senior people across, a number of different businesses across the UK. Are you seeing a pattern here, or do you think we've kind of almost reset, trying to block out the pandemic? Are we talking about things enough? What's your professional experience on this?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people, most people, still trying to find the right balance in their life now between work and life, and trying to juggle. In some ways, having time at home, to see more of kids or to do a class or do something outside of work has been a plus, and they don't want to give that up to return to work. And then you've got the travel costs of a couple of days a weekend, and people are finding it stressful trying to settle into this new pattern. And the biggest thing for me is those people who are at home summer all the time. It is very hard for us as a firm and our clients to know how they are really, because you don't see enough of them. You don't witness, you can't see some of the behaviours. And so how do you ever find out how these people are in time? I mean, my son, he's traveling now. He worked for a law firm in the marketing department, and I thought his team, his marketing function, were quite good in creating reasons why he should come to the office on certain days, because they're all going to get together and go to a certain office. So there's a reason to go in. You do something social. They managed to create this team environment with people in different places, but hook them together. So he wasn't going in because he had to go in because it was a law. It was because he wanted to do something and meet people. That balance, some firms have managed to work out. Some are still struggling to do so.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Lou, that's a brilliant segue through to some of the things that you're finding that's working. I mean, you've essentially created an army of mental health first aiders, haven't you?
Well, no, I can't say I have created them. No,
I'm going to give you credit.
We've got 50 across the business now, and I think if you put yourself forward for the training, you're probably of a certain ilk anyway. You've possibly already got a lot of the skills. You are that person that goes and says, "Are you okay?" Or are you really okay? As you say, Gary, as I said earlier, it's very easy to just go, "Oh, yeah, I'm fine," and for you to take that and walk away. But actually, it's having the skill, I suppose, to then go and have that second conversation to prod a little deeper, just to make sure that they are actually okay. But what I was thinking when Gary and Estelle were just speaking was that we've got generations of people within the workforce, some of whom their normal is pre-pandemic, and they were established in the workplace in that pre-pandemic world. And so managing the change to going home was difficult. To then manage the change coming back is difficult because it doesn't look the same. But we've also then got some people who had just started at work, weren't really established, but then the pandemic happened. But we've also got 4 years worth of people who've never known what it was like to work in an office 5 days a week. And so within that, I mean, I think the pandemic didn't create mental health and well-being issues at all, but I think it's put a microscope on this, so that it's broken down some barriers that we're able to talk about it more because people have that shared experience. But actually, what we've got is a number of generations of people in the workplace who all work in very different ways and have different foundations in how they work, and that in itself is quite difficult. As Gary said, you're managing people who've got a home life, a work life. They're trying to balance those, but also balancing it with what's best for the business, and actually just trying to pull all of that together is quite tricky. So going back to your question, Sarah, about what we've tried to do, along with the army of the mental health first aiders, and I am going to call us that now. We're there to listen, but also to ask the right questions, but also to signpost, because we're not medical professionals. We are just there for people to come and talk to us, and if we can help and talking helps, that may be enough. Or it may be that actually we need to signpost them to other organisations or some specific support or counselling, and all of that we can help facilitate. But then what we've also done, we have these inclusion groups where we basically celebrate commonality. So that might be religious commonality. It might be we've got a neurodiversity inclusion group. We have a menopause inclusion group. It's really trying to bring people together where there is something in common, and it's, if you like, a group, a network a support as well. So that's working really well. And we've got increasing numbers of those as people have come forward and says, actually, I know quite a few people in the business that would like to do this. And that's a great way of making sure people have got that social cohesion, which hopefully in itself helps with mental health and well-being. And then also just really making sure we've got that focus as a business on mental health and well-being, which the Wellbeing Inclusion Group is part of. We look at the 4 pillars. So we look at mental, physical, financial and social, and we try and at different times have different initiatives. Things like, for social, it might be working with the social committees to make sure that there are activities for people to go to. It might be on a physical level, exercise sessions run in the office, or for financial, we do book swaps, seed swaps, looking at office breakfasts, just things to just address different parts of people's lives where they might be struggling to keep those 4 pillars of well-being sort of in balance. So it's trying not to get to that emergency situation. Let's look at it at well-being to begin with. Actually, it may develop into something more serious where a call might be made to a mental health first aider. It may need to then be escalated to outside professionals. But it's really just trying to have a focus and attention on everybody looking after themselves primarily. We can't put this on other people to look after us. Look after yourself primarily, but also looking out for others. And actually, if you're looking out for others, that comes back tenfold, doesn't it? So really, that's, as a business, I think that's important to really be looking after our people. And as you said, Gary, it's your work life, is your home life. It could be any of those things that are out of balance. We also as mental health first aiders talk to people who are looking after other people with mental health concerns. So it's kind of just providing that holistic approach. So there should be something there for everybody to find that support if they need it.
Thanks, Lou. There's so much in there. I'm conscious of time. We are going to need to wrap up. I love your idea that you've got to put the oxygen mask on yourself first. It's exactly that point. If you don't do that, you won't be able to help the person sitting next to you. And I love your social cohesion point, but also allowing people to enter this and come into this in a way that suits them, having that choice, not treating everybody as the same. Really, really good stuff. Estelle, any final words from you? And then I'll just come for you for a closing thought, Gary.
It's just super impressive, everything that you're doing. I think organisations have moved on so quickly in response to the pandemic, and just so impressed, Louise, with everything that you're doing. And thank you, Gary, for sharing your story.
Gary, final thoughts on today?
Echoing what Estelle just said about, it's great to see and hear everything that you guys are doing at your place, Sarah. But no, I mean, just to thank you really, you as well, and the guys on this call, being what you're like. So I felt comfortable opening my mouth in the first place, which is a start, and that's built on, on your own profile and what people have done over many years. You have to have people in your life that you just feel able to open your mouth to it, and then it can begin. So thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Really, really appreciate everything that everybody's done today. So, Totum will continue. I am absolutely certain going from strength to strength with you and Tim driving it forwards. And like I said earlier, congratulations again on that 20-year anniversary, but also getting your B Corps status. That's phenomenal stuff. And Estelle, I love watching your journey. Your book came out last year, the year before, a couple of years ago.
It's the 2-year anniversary today.
Wow. So it's inner brilliance, outer shine. And what I love about your approach, Estelle, is if we get that right inside, again, it just flows through, doesn't it? And that's why it is worth spending time developing yourself, working on yourself, having that inner voice that Gary spoke to. And Lou, on behalf of everybody in our business, I have to continue to say thank you. You guys continue to help in ways that you probably don't even understand just by being there. And I feel very proud and pleased that you're doing that. I know there will be other brilliant things going on at other businesses externally as well. And I hope when we post this, people will share tips and ideas and resources as well, because the more we share, the rising tide lifts all the boats. We absolutely want to make sure we're making this a more kinder, better, more human world so that we can all thrive and succeed. So thank you again, Gary, for setting off this really positive chain. And thank you for helping lots of people, but helping me as well.
Thank you.